Playing with Power MTG now has a Patreon. When you support us on Patreon, you can get early access to deck lists, videos, and Patreon-only videos like commentary, raw footage, and more. Check out the link in the description below and subscribe today. Playing with Power is also supported by Flipside Gaming. When you use the promo code POWER in all caps, you get 10% off orders $10 or more. It saves you money and helps us out at the same time. Finally, please subscribe to us on social media. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Check out the description below and subscribe today. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Playing with Power MTG, where we play with the most powerful cards in the most powerful formats. Today's game brings some new decks to the table, and we will see who will come out on top. Let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Mike, piloting Tymna and Kraum. This deck focuses on assembling combos with wheel effects to abuse payoffs from your opponent's drawing and discarding. He didn't like his first hand, so he mulligans it away. He also didn't like what he drew for his second hand, which contains no land, so he mulligans that away as well. His final hand contains a Rolling Earthquake, Mana Drain, Sea of Clouds, Mana Vault, Flooded Strand, and an Underground Sea. Next, we have Folger, piloting Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder. This Storm deck abuses Cascade triggers off of its commander and leverages the CMC of Suspend cards in order to storm off for the win. His opening hand contains a Talisman of Dominance, Chrome Mox, Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Dark Ritual, Breeding Pool, and a Bloodstained Mire. After that, we have Garrett, bringing back Tasigur, the Golden Fang. This control deck abuses the graveyard through Tasigur's ability and other graveyard abilities such as Dredge. His opening hand contains an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, Assassin's Trophy, Runic Armasaur, Birds of Paradise, Tropical Island, and a Pongify. Finally, we have Ryan, piloting Xantcha, Sleeper Agent. This control combo deck seeks to slow down other players while setting up for one of its game-winning mana engines to finish each player off with Xantcha's ability. His opening hand contains a Bloodchief Ascension, Animate Dead, Sign in Blood, Blood Crypt, Swamp, Toxic Deluge, and a Lion's Eye Diamond. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Folger wins the What's in the Box challenge and gets to start us off. Folger plays a Bloodstained Mire for turn. He casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Dark Ritual. He cracks his Mire for a Blood Crypt into play untapped, taking 2 life. He then casts Talisman of Dominance. He ends his turn. Mike plays a Flooded Strand for turn. He cracks it for a Tropical Island. He casts a Mana Vault and gives the turn over to Garrett. Garrett plays a Tropical Island of his own for turn. He plays a Birds of Paradise and ends his turn. Ryan plays a Blood Crypt into play untapped, taking 2 life. He casts a Bloodchief Ascension. Folger responds by tapping his Talisman, taking 1 damage, and casting Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Ascension then resolves, and Ryan follows up by casting Lion's Eye Diamond. He gives the turn to Folger. Folger plays a Breeding Pool into play untapped, taking 2 life. He taps his Talisman to help cast Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder. He ships his turn to Mike. Mike plays a Sea of Clouds for turn. He then casts Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. He attacks Ryan with Kraum and passes the turn. Garrett plays an island for turn. He casts Gilded Drake. Much to the dismay of Folger, Drake enters and exchanges control with Yidris. He follows up with a Carpet of Flowers. He moves to his second main phase and adds a blue through the carpet. He casts Pongify, targeting Mike's Kraum. Mike gets a 3/3 ape, and Garrett ends his turn. Ryan plays a Swamp for turn. He casts Sign in Blood, drawing 2 and losing 2 life. He passes. Folger casts a Demonic Tutor for turn. He searches up a card into his hand. He plays a Carpet of Flowers of his own for turn. He moves to his second main and adds 2 red through the carpet. He casts a Wheel of Fortune. Everyone discards their hand and draws a new hand of 7. He plays a Steam Vents untapped, taking 2 life. Next, he casts Ponder. All through, he passes. Mike plays a Gemstone Caverns for turn and ends his turn. In his first main phase, Garrett adds 2 blue through the carpet. He plays an Underground Sea. He casts Ashiok, Dream Render. He attacks Folger with his own Yidris for the extra feel bads. In his second main phase, he casts a Dimir Signet. He cascades into a Utopia Sprawl, casting it and naming blue. Afterward, he casts Tasigur. He activates Ashiok, milling himself for 4 and exiling everyone else's graveyard. Finished up, he gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan plays a Swamp for turn. He casts a Chains of Mephistopheles. I feel like this is a good place to pause and speak quickly to exactly what Chains of Mephistopheles does. In the most basic of terms, if you would draw any card except for the first one you draw in your draw step, you instead discard a card, then draw a card. This is also known as rummaging. If your hand is empty, instead of drawing, you mill the top card of your library into your graveyard. Anyway, back to the video. After that, Ryan passes. Folger plays a command tower for turn. He casts a Tender Wall. He moves to his second main phase and adds 3 black mana through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts a Praetor's Grasp, targeting Garrett. The spell resolves and he searches Garrett's library for a card and exiles it face down. He then loses 2 life through Bloodchief Ascension and Ryan gains 2 life. Finished up, Folger shifts the turn to Mike. At the end of Folger's turn, Mike flashes in an Aven Mind Sensor. Mike plays a Mana Confluence for turn and passes. Garrett attacks Ryan with Yidris and Folger with Tasigur. Folger blocks with the Tender Wall, sacrificing it for 2 red. He uses that red and the rest of his mana to cast what he exiled with Praetor's Grasp, which is an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Garrett responds by casting Negate, targeting the Rift. Rift is countered, and Garrett loses 4 life through Bloodchief Ascension. In his second main phase, Garrett adds 2 green through his Carpet of Flowers, and then casts a Regrow, targeting Narset, Harder of Veils in his graveyard. A Cascade trigger goes onto the stack, and Garrett cascades into a Nature's Claim, targeting Ryan's Bloodchief Ascension. Next, Garrett plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast his newly acquired Narset. He cascades into a Simic Signet. He activates his Narset, looking at the top 4 of his library and revealing a Life from the Loam. He casts a Life from the Loam. He cascades again and casts a Deathrite Shaman. Loam resolves and he returns 3 lands from his graveyard to his hand, and then he finishes up his turn. Ryan plays a Gemstone Caverns for turn and passes. In his first main phase, Folger adds 3 green through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts Assassin's Trophy, targeting his Yidris. Garrett looks for a basic land, but can only look at the top 4 due to Aven Mind Sensor. He fails to find and shuffles his library. Folger then recasts Yidris. He plays a Misty Rainforest for turn. He attacks Garrett's Ashiok with his Gilded Drake. He ends his turn. At the end of Folger's turn, Mike taps Mana Confluence to help cast Limdul's Vault. He looks at the top 5, likes what he sees, and rearranges them. On Mike's turn, he attacks Ashiok with his Mind Sensor, and Narset with his Beast. Garrett chump blocks the Beast with his Deathrite Shaman to save his Narset, and his Ashiok dies. In his second main, Mike casts Gilded Drake. Folger dies on the inside, cries on the outside, and Mike exchanges control of the Drake for Yidris. He gives the turn to Garrett. On Garrett's turn, he activates his Narset, looking at the top 4 and revealing a Rhystic Study. He casts his newly acquired Rhystic Study. Next, he casts Sylvan Library. Everyone cringes at how Chains and Sylvan Library is going to play out, and Garrett passes his turn. Ryan plays a Wooded Foothills for turn, and passes. Folger plays an Arid Mesa for turn, and passes. At the end of Folger's turn, Mike taps his Mana Confluence to cast Vampiric Tutor, and pays the Rhystic tax. On Mike's turn, he attacks Ryan with Yidris and Narset with his Mind Sensor. Ryan responds by casting Fire Covenant, paying 11 life, and targeting Birds of Paradise, Aven Mind Sensor, Yidris, and Tasigur. Garrett responds by activating his Tasigur, milling the top 2, and choosing Mike to give him a card from his graveyard. Mike, wanting to strike up an alliance and hoping Garrett will do something about the Fire Covenant, gives him Negate. With Tasigur resolving, and in a shocking betrayal to Mike, Garrett passes priority on the Fire Covenant, and it resolves, killing the 4 creatures. In his second main phase, Mike casts Waste Not. Garrett responds by casting that Negate. Ryan responds by cracking his Wooded Foothills because the Aven Mind Sensor is gone, and fetches up a Badlands. Alliance is broken, Waste Not is countered. Then Mike ends his turn. During his draw step, Sylvan Library's trigger resolves. He draws his first card. He then discards a card and draws a card through his second library trigger through Chains. For his third draw, he then dredges 3 to return Life from the Loam from his graveyard to his hand. He then pays 4 life to keep the second card he drew. In his main phase, he casts Life from the Loam, targeting Wooded Foothills, Polluted Delta, and an island. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast Toxic Deluge, paying 3 life and wiping the board. He plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it for a swamp. He delves away some of his graveyard to recast Tasigur. He moves to his second main phase and adds 2 blue through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts a Search for Xantcha and passes his turn. Ryan plays a Grim Monolith for turn. He follows up by casting Waste Not. He ships his turn to Folger. At the end of Ryan's turn, Folger cracks his Arid Mesa for his Stomping Ground and his Misty Rainforest for an Overgrown Tomb. Folger plays a Forest for turn and passes. During Mike's upkeep, he taps his Mana Confluence to help untap his Mana Vault. He draws his card for turn and passes to Garrett. During his draw step, Sylvan Library's trigger resolves. He draws his first card. He dredges life from the loam for his second draw. He discards through Thought Vessel to draw his third. Ryan's Waste Knot triggers through his Garrett's discard, and he discards and draws a card. Garrett then puts the card he drew back on top of his library. Garrett plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. He cracks it for a Bayou. He casts Life from the Loam, targeting Wooded Foothills, Verdant Catacombs, and Yavimaya Coast. Next, he casts Dark Confidant. He moves to his second main phase, adding 2 green through his Carpet of Flowers. He taps his Ancient Tomb and uses his Carpet mana to activate Tasigur, choosing Mike. Mike gives him a Fellwar Stone, and then he passes the turn. Moving to his instep, Garrett has 8 cards in hand, so he discards his Fellwar Stone. Ryan's Waste Knot trigger goes onto the stack, and his draw ability is replaced by Chains. And since Narset is still on the board, he already drew a card for turn, he just discards a card. A strong feeling of hopelessness sweeps over him, and he discards Everflowing Chalice. On his turn, Ryan casts Xantcha, Sleeper Agent. He strikes up an accord with Mike, saying that if he gives him Xantcha, he will get rid of Narset. Mike agrees, and Xantcha resolves. Mike gains control of Xantcha, and Ryan passes the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Folger activates Xantcha. Chains triggers and Folger rummages through Chains, drawing a card, and Mike loses 2 life. Folger casts a Mana Vault for turn. He moves to his second main phase and adds 3 green through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts Yidris for the 3rd time, paying the Rhystic tax. He follows up by casting Thoughtseize, targeting Garrett. Rhystic Studies triggers resolves, Garrett rummages away Isochron Scepter, and Ryan discards Sweltering Suns to draw through Waste Knot. Garrett then activates Tasigur, choosing Mike. Mike gives him Talisman of Dominance. Thoughtseize resolves, and Folger chooses Yawgmoth's Will. Garrett discards Will, Ryan's Waste Knot triggers, Narset's ability prevents him from drawing a card, so Ryan discards Past in Flames. With nothing else, Folger passes his turn. On Mike's turn, and true to his word, he attacks Narset with Ryan's Xantcha. Garrett double blocks with Tasigur and Dark Confidant. Mike chooses to direct damage to kill the Dark Confidant. In his second main phase, Mike casts an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Next, he casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Pyroclasm. He ends his turn. Garrett plays a Polluted Delta for turn. He recasts Carpet of Flowers. He follows up with a Rhystic Study. He delves away some of his graveyard again to recast Tasigur. Next, he casts Mana Crypt. He cracks his Polluted Delta to fetch up an island. After that, he casts Narset. He activates Narset, looking at the top floor and revealing Golgari Signet. He casts a Talisman of Dominance. He moves to his second main phase and adds 2 black through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts a Dimir Signet and follows up with a Simic Signet. Done dumping out his hand, he ends his turn. On Ryan's turn, he recasts his Waste Knot, paying the Rhystic tax. He passes. Folger recasts his Carpet of Flowers, paying the Rhystic tax. He moves to his second main phase and adds 4 black through his Carpet. He casts Dark Confidant, paying the Rhystic tax. He follows up by recasting Yidris. He passes. On his turn, Mike taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Tymna the Weaver. He ends his turn. On Garrett's turn, he activates Narset, looking at the top 4 and revealing Noxious Revival. He pays 2 life and casts Noxious Revival, targeting his Paradox Engine. He cycles Tranquil Thicket, discarding and drawing his Paradox. He attempts to cast Paradox Engine. Mike responds by casting Pact of Negation, and the engine is countered. Garrett then activates Tasigur, choosing Mike. Mike gives him Life from the Loam. He casts Search for Xantcha, and then moving to his second main phase, adds 2 black through his Carpet of Flowers. He casts a Golgari Signet, and shifts the turn to Ryan. Ryan plays a Mountain for turn. He casts a Grim Monolith, paying the Rhystic tax. He passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Folger casts Abrupt Decay, targeting Garrett's Narset. During his upkeep, Folger reveals a Gitaxian Probe through his Dark Confidant. Moving directly to combat, he attacks Ryan with his Yidris. In his second main phase, he adds 4 black through his Carpet. He casts a Mystical Tutor. A Cascade trigger and a Rhystic Study trigger go onto the stack. Garrett responds by casting his own Mystical Tutor. Garrett's Tutor resolves, and he fetches up a Force of Will. The Rhystic Study trigger resolves, and he draws a card. Folger's Cascade trigger resolves, and he casts a Lion's Eye Diamond, triggering another Rhystic Study. He does not pay the study, and Garrett draws another card. Then the Mystical Tutor resolves, and Folger fetches up a Duress. Folger casts a Talisman of Dominance. The triggers go back onto the stack again. Rhystic resolves, and Garrett draws. The Cascade resolves, and Folger casts his Duress. Garrett responds to his Rhystic trigger by casting Force of Will, targeting the Talisman of Dominance. The Talisman is countered, and Duress resolves. Folger targets Ryan with his Duress, and he discards a Vampiric Tutor. Folger casts Gitaxian Probe. He cascades into a Lotus Petal. He looks at Garrett's hand and draws a card. He casts Preordain. He cascades into a Monk's Opal. He scries 2 and draws a card. He casts a Wild Candor. He cascades into a Mana Crypt. He pays 2 life and casts Noxious Revival, targeting Mystical Tutor. He cascades into a Mox Diamond. To help with his storm count, he decides to cast it and doesn't discard the land, letting it go to the graveyard. Then Mystical Tutor goes onto the top of his library. He casts a Mana Vault. He missed the sequencing a little because his Cascade trigger goes onto the stack and he must now exile away his Mystical Tutor. He cascades into a Lotus Bloom. In a sad turn of events, he wasn't able to hit any of his 0-drop draw spells to refill his hand, and reluctantly has to pass the turn to Mike. During Mike's upkeep, he pays for his Pact of Negation trigger. He attacks Ryan with Tymna. He gains 2 life and then pays 1 to draw a card. He pays 2 life and casts Ataxian Probe, targeting Garrett. He looks at Garrett's hand and draws a card. He plays a Badlands for turn and passes. During Garrett's upkeep, he casts Reap, targeting Folger and returning Isochron Scepter and Paradox Engine from his graveyard to his hand. In his main phase, he casts his Paradox Engine. He follows up with an Isochron Scepter. The Scepter resolves and he imprints Dramatic Reversal. With infinite mana and infinite Paradox triggers, he activates Tasigur's ability repeatedly to mill his entire library and return all non-land permanents to his hand. He uses Beast Within combined with Tasigur's ability to blow up all of his opponent's permanents. He then uses Reality Shift combined with Tasigur's ability to exile all beasts and manifest the top of their libraries. He repeatedly casts Reality Shift on the manifested cards over and over again to mill everyone's libraries until they are all empty, and then exiles all remaining manifests. With nothing on any opponent's board and no cards in their library, he passes the turn. Ladies and gentlemen, what a game. Garrett is this week's champion by staying strong and controlling the board with the Planeswalkers from War of the Spark. Tasigur's ability to recur spells from his graveyard gives him amazing resiliency and redundancy to pull out the win. Folger had a string of super bad luck by getting his Yidris taken 2 times with Gilded Drake and then bricking on his storm turn. Mike and Ryan didn't have the means to get ahead with all the control elements, disruption, and lack of good draws. That wraps up this week's episode, but join us next time as we will see who is king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.